Welcome back. There are claims this morning that around a third of police officers have been unable to get the right PPE supplies during the pandemic. The findings are part of the annual pay and morale study carried out by the Police Federation. John Apter is the National Chair for the Police Federation of England and Wales. Pleased to say that he joins us now. John, good to see you this morning. Well, just take us through. What's the research found?
Good morning. Well, first of all, we represent 130,000 police officers across England and Wales, and the response rate was really significant. It was more than 25,000 of our colleagues responded to the survey, and it was about pay and morale, and certainly the pay side. This survey was done before the pay freeze announcement, but even so, officers felt let down by government, in particular on the pay and conditions. But when it comes to the pandemic, it's had a devastating impact for the whole country, but in fact, globally. But police officers really have felt it for a number of reasons. And you rightly say about the access to PPE. This is early on in the pandemic. Early on in the pandemic, there was a real concern that my colleagues were not getting the protective equipment that they needed. But I accept that this was a problem across all of public sector. Understandably, there was a priority for NHS. And we were working tirelessly in the background with colleagues from the National Police Chiefs Council to try and fix this. In my view, it took too long, but we did get there, and it got better as the pandemic went on. But there's lessons for us all in this, certainly as a society, that we need to be far better prepared for situations like this, well, as prepared as we can be. So yes, there was an issue with PPE. It got better as time went on. But overall morale has been really damaged. And this needs to be a real wake-up call for government ministers and leaders within policing. Because if this is ignored, if this is dismissed as just police officers moaning, then I'm afraid that would be unforgivable. My colleagues, this is a cry for help from my colleagues. They want something done about their morale in particular. Certainly the pay and conditions is being affected for all of public sector. That doesn't make it right. And there's things that we need to do about that. But this is a difficult place that we're in at the moment, and policing feels really let down for a whole host of reasons. Mixed messages, damned if they do, damned if they don't when it comes to enforcing legislation. They are doing an incredibly difficult job in the most challenging of times, and that doesn't seem to be recognised by many people.
Yeah, I mean, we were discussing this in the newsroom before we came on air this morning. The idea that people probably just haven't recognised. They understand the police have not had a day off since this all started. They've been out there on the front line, but the attention has, perhaps understandably, been on the frontline workers on the healthcare side of things.
Absolutely, no, and I don't criticise that. I understand that completely, but I represent police officers, and they are as as important as anybody else. Their voice deserves to be heard, and they have shouted out very loudly. 25,000 of them. 65% of those who responded to the survey say that their morale has been damaged by what's gone on during the pandemic. And this isn't about them feeling sorry for themselves. Look, police officers know it's a tough job. But policing is unpredictable and it's dangerous. But during this pandemic, they really have been the political pawns in this. We've seen the way they police protests, they can't get it right. They're criticised by one side, applauded by the other. But then the very next day, it'll be the other way around. They are simply damned if they do and damned if they don't. It's a really tough job. And this pandemic has highlighted just how tough it is. We had a debate yesterday, and no doubt it'll roll on today, about what is a substantial meal. And, I've read in some media that police officers are expected to police that. How absurd, how ridiculous. I have to choose my language carefully. Christmas Day, let me tell you, police officers are not going to be knocking on doors to count how many people are sitting around the table unless there's a serious public health issue, Police officers have been almost painted as the villains of this pandemic. That is grossly unfair. It's an incredibly tough job, and I couldn't be more proud of my colleagues stepping up to the plate and doing what they need to do during what has been a really tough time and a crisis for our society.
I suppose, though, John, that the kind of the counter to that is, I mean, if the police are not going to police the COVID-19 regulations, then who should?
Yeah, no, good question. But there's so many different agencies, and certainly what people think is that everything is left to the police. So let's use an example: the social distancing. It's not legally enforceable. It's guidance. But police officers have been criticised for saying, well, you're not enforcing social distancing. It is about groups or more, but even then, especially with the tiering system coming into place, it's incredibly complicated. It's complicated for the public to understand. Many of my colleagues have to refresh their memory time and time again because the legislation is changing so quickly. But there's other agencies that enforce certain parts of the legislation. It's not all down to policing. But I think the perception is that it is, and it's not. And that's where leaders within policing and government ministers need to be really honest with the public and say not everything should land at policing's door, because if it does, it's unmanageable. We can't deal with it.
John, we're about to run out of time, but I do want to ask, with these issues around morale, with these issues around pay, with the issues around, perhaps in some parts of the country, the lack of consent that people are giving to the police to be police, what do you see for police retention numbers?
Well, we're already losing more officers mid-service than we ever have before. That's a real concern. We are recruiting at the moment, but I've said to chief constables, the Home Secretary and others, whoever will listen, recruitment is so important, but retention is as important. We can't lose that experience. Morale is really low at the moment. I love policing. I think policing is a vocation. It's something that I'm proud to be a police officer, but we can't ignore 25,000 voices who are asking to be heard. They need to be heard by government ministers and by leaders within policing.
John Apter, good to see you this morning. Thanks for being with us.